Right, well, here we are. Martin, Reverend Martin, former prison chaplain, lifetime of ministry in the church and in the prison. You've now been released. You are retired. And disclosure time, you are my father-in-law. Is that right?
It is, and thank you for taking my favourite daughter. No, I can't say
No, you can't say that. We've got to stop. We've got to do it again. Oh, gosh.
No jokes, Martin, no jokes. Pull yourself together. I'm sorry, Richard.
That's right. That's right. We'll do it again. We'll do it again.
No jokes.
All right. No, you can't do that. The family jokes that won't cut it. They won't work. I'm just going to leave this rolling as well, by the way. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Martin, it's really good to see you. Thanks for coming to do this interview with us and for the sake of our church here. We're going to talk about church life and culture. You are a Church of England vicar, you were at least, Reverend Martin, and much of that time was spent in prison chaplaincy, where you gained a keen insight into particularly youth culture, I would imagine,
yes,
and lots of other things like that. And this is the point where we need to disclose for the guys watching that you are my father-in-law as well. So I hang on your every word. So anyway, we're going to discuss church and culture, and you're going to do most of the talking, but we're going to have a conversation and we're just going to see how it goes. Okay. And we've got to learn to pass this microphone between the two of us, otherwise we won't hear each other at all. Okay? So you've raised some issues that have really captured my imagination. A couple of weeks ago, I said a phrase that you coined, that you gave me about 6 weeks before that. That was the phrase, pay and pray. Now, if that is misunderstood, it can sound awful, but if it's rightly understood, the idea behind it can be something that's really useful in understanding how and why a church can move forward, or the church, big C, can move forward. So I just want to pick up on a couple of lines that you've started on some questions that you've raised, then I'm going to hand the mic to you and you can just respond. Is that okay? Okay, you've written, in the UK, apart from a very few exceptions, the physical church attendance age ranging from 13 to 30 is largely missing. Okay, that's now standard fare. That's common in almost every single area of research. Considering the church in England generally, how many generations of young people have we missed with the gospel since 1950? 3 or 4? Question.
Well, again, if you just look around, you'll find the age group 13 to 30 is absent. It's not that they've turned Christianity down. It hasn't occurred to them. It's absent.
Why do you think that's the case? We're in a post-Christendom world. We're in a highly secular world. The culture now is extremely different from a 1940s, 50s, 60s even culture, especially. So what has the church missed in those years?
Looking around, for example, Exeter, there are at least 4 churches in Exeter which are full of young people, but they are remarkably different in the way they run than, shall we say, the average church.
So four churches in Exeter that are doing this. Yep. Multiply that in varying degrees to other parts of the country. What is being done that's different, and why is it having to be done in a different place by a younger congregation?
The worship is extremely lively. There's plenty of movement. The singing and I'm going to say the dancing, but the movement is extravagant. It's loud, and for someone of my age, it's not very pleasant. But that's the whole point, isn't it? At least one of my main points, that it doesn't suit my generation, but it does suit the young people. That's where they are. And they don't have long sermons, but they have loads of quick sound bites going through the service. And they interview ordinary people about their everyday Christianity and how it's working out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And in those interviews, you can immediately see how Christianity functions, how it works, what difference it makes. And I think that's the way forward.
Okay, so why is that being missed in a lot of more established churches with an older age group demographic? What's being missed here? It's not just getting older and more tired, is it? There's something else going on. There's the music wars, the worship wars of old. There's generational gaps. It's a rapid rate of change as well, where we often struggle to understand the language of our own kids, never mind our own grandkids or whatever. So what is really going on in the church? What have we missed, do you think, in your church where you worship and in many mainstream churches today?
That's such a big question, Richard. One of the things I've noticed, and I've been around them, one of the things I've noticed in these churches is they're not stuck with having to keep the building as they inherited it. Fortunately, these are not buildings with grade 1 or grade 2 listings, so they can put in lighting, smoke machines. First time I went to worship and there was a smoke machine, I really wondered what on earth was going on. It was quite outrageous, but it works for their culture. All sorts of musical instruments, lighting, colour up and down the walls. That sort of thing. That they don't care about the building. The building isn't sacred. What is sacred is the worship. The building has to fit in with the new cultural needs.
In every case, would you say?
Yes.
Right. So what am I doing here at Taunton Baptist Church? Have I got to live with a generational divide and soak it up? Or what's the answer there?
There mustn't be a generational divide. I think once we start having a youth service, as distinct from an act of worship in which the youth are not only welcome, but it is primarily for their style, that's the really crucial thing. And my generation, and indeed I'm rattling on towards 80 for goodness sake, but the people much younger than me, 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, we need to sacrifice what we have inherited. Sacrifice it so that the 40s and unders, especially the 30s and unders, can not only feel at home, but everything speaks to them and their needs, because we're heading straight for the crematorium. Well, I am. And we leave everything behind. And is there going to be a vacuum? Looking around my present congregation, we were saying the other day that we've got very few people under the age of 60. Well, we're all old age pensioners. We've missed generations, and we can't just get them back. We're literally going to die out. But it doesn't have to be like that. Now, here at Taunton Baptist, my observation is that you've got some young people, but they need to be increasingly in the front, and everything geared to them and their spiritual growth.
All right. There's an anxiety in the church.
Huge.
Because of this generational gap. And that causes a lot of uncertainty and stress in the wrong places. And I think that my own reading of culture and recent history has shown that is definitely what has been motivating the church. in mission the missing generations, the age group really that I'm at the top end of. So it's very interesting to hear you say that. So moving on, you talk on your list of questions about leadership roles to be held by the age group that are often held by the age group that are over 50 plus. There's something there about leadership and testing and calling and maturity and so on. But you also argue for taking the risk of leadership with younger people, to the point where you talk about Jesus not choosing elders but the youngsters. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, Jesus, he could have chosen anyone he liked for those 12 disciples. But he didn't go for the wise elders. They wouldn't have had the energy. They wouldn't have had the zeal. They wouldn't have had the ability to think broad as well as deep and leave behind everything and press on to the totally unknown. It isn't that the older people are redundant, but they're not going to be the leaders of tomorrow. We've had our tomorrow.
Today. Now you mentioned your age a little while ago. You said you are pushing 80. All right, knocking on the door of 80. Not yet, but soon. Now, you must have total agreement with those who are within a few years of your own age right now of what you're saying. Are you in total agreement with your peers? Or are you a lone voice in what we're talking about right now?
No, I think actually, my particular church, we've had some very interesting experiences. We had tell me if I'm rambling, we had a very, very good worship leader, 70 years old? He had to sell up and move. And we all said, crumbs, we've lost the best worship leader you could get. But it's not true, you see, because he was a worship leader for the over 50s. Now, sitting in our congregation, unknown to us, was a deputy headmaster who played the piano fairly well, but not leading public worship. However, the moment we were stuck, he came out and learnt how to play the piano in such a way that he led worship. Okay, it was a bit fumbling to start with, but quite quickly he picked it up. And of course, being a young man with a young family, I'd say he's about 40, he's chosen young hymns with enthusiasm, and he plays that piano now. I'm surprised it stays on the stage. It almost bounces around, and so the worship has become electrified. But it's different because the pianist is different.
It's very interesting, isn't it? How the worship wars of old, different styles of music, different styles of songs of
And another bit of excitement, which I find very exciting. A lot of us old folk have had it in, we resigned, because frankly, I'm too old to stand up and say very much, as you can see. But what happened was then, again, 3 people in the congregation who really just were pew fodder have come out and begun to lead worship and even to give short talks. I'll avoid the word sermon, which I think is far too loaded, but short talks based on their experience of life, but also how they've been reading the scriptures that week. And that's been electrifyingly different. So if there's 3, well, there's 6. We need the people to discover their ministry. And they won't discover their ministry if we expect them not to. If our expectation is, come, sit there, we're going to do it at the front. It's time for us old folk to retire.
Retire, eh? But not from the sense of serving and loving and relating in the church, though. It's not absolving of responsibilities. No. I mean, one of the main tenets of my view of ministry is gift-led ministry. You know, everybody's uniquely gifted by God to serve. Yes. So the phrase that inspired me, pay and pray, as I said earlier, could sound insulting, but it's not. When properly understood, because if you were a member of a church, you've been here for decades, you're in your late 70s, early 80s, possibly even older, and you just don't like the way things are done these days, that's a problem. So what do you mean by pay and pray?
Those of us who are fairly ancient, we've learnt the value of prayer. Without prayer, my Christianity would never have survived. And there have been many times when I've been desperately praying. My favourite prayer is, God, if you don't turn up, I'm scuppered. But of course he always does. And that's wonderful. I'm going to digress unless you stop me. Can I tell you why I retired from prison ministry? Because I didn't have to. I retired from prison ministry when I realised that I couldn't understand the culture of the young men coming into prison. I just couldn't understand it. Not only that, I didn't want to understand it. It was totally outside my grasp. Now, the average age of prisoners is under 30. And so I realised that I couldn't be a prison chaplain because I'd left their world. I'd grown out of it. And so it was time to go.
All right, then. Take that digression and put it into the life of the church. When an older, ageing, tired generation doesn't get the culture they're in, or some of the youth that might come through the doors at best, what are they going to do in the life of the church? They can't not go to church, can they?
Certainly not. No. Well, it's great because once you retire in that sense, you retire from, shall we say, upfront ministry, that gives you tons of energy. And you can talk to people, meet people, listen to people, listen to young people, pray with them, counsel them. You're not redundant, but it's just simply different. You get out of the way, let them get on, but they need a wise head here and there. And so that's you. And at my age, I realised the other day that I shan't live long enough to spend all my savings. Oh, what that means? I'm fortunate. Yeah. I appreciate that not everybody is, but I do have some spare dosh. So now's the time to be generous and give it. Now, I repeat, I realise that doesn't apply to everybody. But nevertheless, there's a lot of us in my age group who are in the same position. We've got money. Be generous.
Amen to that, father-in-law. Let's go down this list that you've written here. You said a first-class leader in their 50s, that rules me out on both counts, can too easily become a drag in progressive planning and change by the time they are 60, and a hindrance from anything over 60. Why is that, is your question? While Christianity in terms of belief and theology has fixed parameters, the culture in which it swims in the tide of life is always rapidly evolving.
I thought that was rather good.
Yes, it was good, yes.
But what's very good? Yes, I'm going to repeat it because I think it's very good indeed. Yes, the culture in which our Christianity swims is constantly evolving. And that's always been true. Yes. But as we get older, it's harder and harder to keep up with it. In fact, we get behind in it. But the young people, they're not only in it, they're generating it. Old age. So we must roll over and take a different role. We're not redundant. It's a different role.
Excellent, and I think well worth repeating that as well. Okay, you've also written here, do we maintain what we have, or can we have church for the under 40s without splitting the church into two congregations?
I would say splitting the church into two is a disaster. The old need the young, and providing the old get out the way, the young need the wisdom and the experience of the old.
Okay, I'm going to revisit this one more time, and it'll be the last time, the pay and pray. I don't think you pushed that, because I had some really affirming comments from a few who understood the heart behind what I was saying, and I think one or two others might have been a bit confused by that, and possibly, as a result of the confusion, possibly hurt through the misunderstanding. Are you just telling me to pay and pray, like I don't matter anymore? That's not the issue.
No.
So what is the issue with that phrase? And then we'll move on to something else.
We are incredibly important people at my age. We've got the time, we've got the energy to pray. We can turn up and be present at acts of worship, and before and afterwards, watch out for people. The other day I spotted several people who didn't go up for communion. They were middle-aged people, and I said to myself, I'll home in on them afterwards and find out why not. And that's the sort of thing you can do when you're not at the front, but you're just looking round in the congregation. And I also found the other day, I'm sitting on the side of the church, one particular person wiped a tear, and I clocked them, and afterwards I just quietly went over to see if they were okay, and they opened up. And it's that sort of thing. It's such a privilege. No, we're not redundant. We can be generous in time and money.
Excellent. Let's see now. Let's just have a look at this list. We've done some of that. Zeal belongs to the under 40s. And I guess by that you mean not zeal in the faith, but you mean actual energy. Just the sheer energy to do the things that need doing. Newness and freshness needs risk takers. Launching out into the deep is not for the old. I want, do comment on that, but I want to also just frame something of my own preaching here. Yeah, sure. I'm doing multiple things when I preach. I am trying to address and reach those that are present before me and on Zoom, the church by and large, with a few visitors here and there. But I also have an eye on 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So on Sunday, I made an appeal for missionaries. Now, I know that most people in the church who are over a certain age are not going to become overseas missionaries. We could quibble about, well, I'm a missionary in this country, fine. I'm not making that distinction, but I was making an appeal nevertheless. The labourers are few, and the harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few passage. Now, I'm not appealing to the guys in front of me, most of them, to sign up for this. I'm doing what the gospel does, which is call men and women out. I'm not just addressing those that are present. I'm addressing the potential as well. Those that might catch that idea of what God might be calling them into, or it might sow a seed in someone who's younger. Because if I'm constantly addressing those in front of me, I mean, I will be the last one to lock up the doors and turn off the lights. So that's what I'm trying to do in my preaching. So that's a comment that I want you to pick up on under this. Launching out into the deep is not for the old, and risk takers. Say something about risk taking.
When God lays his hand on us, which isn't just conversion, it's every day afterwards. When God lays his hand on us, there's always an effect, there's always an appeal, there's always the next step. And the really big steps are probably going to be for those who who can afford to take the risk. Now that's actually very problematic, because you might be married with a young family. But when Jesus called people, that's what he invited them to do. Zacchaeus, get out of that tree. I'm coming to your home for tea. And it was a risk. It was a tremendous risk for Jesus. It was a tremendous risk for Zacchaeus. Goodness knows what his wife thought. But it's a risk. The gospel is riddled with risk. But it's really a risk that needs the input, the energy levels, and the excitement of the young people.
And I think to a certain extent, and to a large extent, affirmation as well. Not just a rigid adherence to church structures or a perceived idea of a tradition, which is always located within a wider tradition. It's much more than that, isn't it? It's much more relational. It's much more affirming. There's nothing better, and I will know this from you, there's nothing better than an affirming grandfather figure in the family. You know, there's nothing better than being affirmed by someone who is elderly.
Who survived.
Someone who survived long enough to say to the granddaughter or grandson, well done, that was brilliant.
Yes. Yes, I mean, I have survived the church. And I'm not kidding, I'm not joking, you see. I have survived the church. Sometimes the church has been wonderful, both the institution and the people. Sometimes it's been appalling, and you have to take both, and we're in it together. Yeah.
I think that there is a sense in which we have to own the mistakes and celebrate the good. Yeah. One Anglican bishop in the 50s called the church full of saints and fatheads, which I loved. It's wheat and weeds in contemporary language as well, and so on. So I was going to say something about grant. Yes, one of the things that I've also done in both here and in my previous church is address. You want to honour those that have been Christians and serving for a long time. Not everybody gets it on the same level, admittedly, but I have made the call for everyone who's at that top end of life to become spiritual mothers and fathers again, to become spiritual grandparents again, especially to an increasingly fractured generation with divorce rates going through the roof, absent fathers all over the place, and all sorts of attendant problems as a consequence of that. So become the spiritual grandparents, not spiritual police officers, keeping the law and strict adherence. But the family sense, which is what the gospel calls us to, isn't it? It's that family sense. So spiritual mothers and fathers, I think, is hugely important as a mission in our day. Okay, we're coming to the end. I'm going to ask a question, not from there, but from my own head at the moment. What has the church missed in recent decades? In most of the decades I've been alive, what have we missed to end up in a situation culturally where we are now that's been exacerbated and magnified because of the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown? It's exposed all sorts of weaknesses, I think, and lots of people are talking about nothing can go back as it was, the church can't be the same again, but I've never ever heard anybody say what it could become. I'm not even sure it's the right thing to say about it, but what has the church missed over those years that is really obvious to you now, for example, or unless we've already talked about it?
I think one of the mistakes we've made is to think of church as in building, especially in my church, in the Church of England. The church is the people. And we've missed that, but also we've missed the fact that Christianity has been taken apart quite deliberately by many people to make Christianity an also-ran. And we didn't see it fast enough to to step up and put Christianity back. So my suggestion is the kingdom is fine. The kingdom of God stands. The gates of hell and the gates of indifference will never prevail against it. But the church, if you mean the fabric, the building, the institution, won't last. It's not eternal. The kingdom is. But that sort of church understanding is not.
While you were saying that, I was reminded of a G.K. Chesterton quote. 5 times in church history, it looked like, to all intents and purposes, the church had gone to the dogs. And then he says, but in every case, it was the dog that died. Anyway, all right. So we've got here the older full of wisdom. I think we have covered it. I'm just going to make sure that we have. We need the oldies. This is your word now. We need the oldies for stability, but not for the breaks. Oldies are the prayer warriors with the scars to prove it, and they have the ability to give financially. Hence the pay and pray comment, which we talked about. Jesus could have chosen the elders, but he chose the under 40s. That's right. There's an honouring and a dignity that is absolutely right, without a patronising and a pandering to, because the church has got a mission, the church has got a vision, which is the gospel, and we have to learn how to interpret the times, don't we? And make sure that we're gift-led, spirit-filled, but also not squashing zeal. I think Paul talks about that, doesn't he, in the New Testament? Anyway, Martin, anything else to add?
I think that's too long, but no.
Well, you would. Short attention span. Good interviews, you could watch them for hours. Anyway, this is probably not one of them. But it's been a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks for coming in. Okay. And maybe when we clamoured into double figures on YouTube, we could, maybe 9 or 10, we might do another interview. We'll see.
Okay.
See you soon.
If I'm still alive.